All right, so this is where I plan on going over a little bit of the general process of test corrections, getting into some specifics with specific questions later on when I actually scroll through the test and talk about what's kind of right and wrong and how you can tell on your own test what's right and wrong, and give you a few hints maybe on how to correct those wrong answers. But the most important thing to keep in mind about your test corrections is that they are due on December 6th. That's a Sunday by midnight. That's right before our exemptions get determined. So make sure that you get this in and done so that you can, make sure you're where you want to be. This is where all of your instructions are, going over that general process of creating a Google document, looking over your test, and then making sure to analyze each of those questions by writing out the question, the right answer, and then justifying it. So I go into a lot more detail here, and hopefully you've taken the time to read over that already, because I am going to go into a little more detail in some places, but not on all of the basics here. So make sure that you have read this. This is going to be really helpful. And this is where you're going to submit your work. Got this submit button that's going to take us to the bottom of the page. You're going to upload a single file as your corrections, and if you have to include any extra pictures or extra stuff, don't add it separately. It needs to be added into the single document where all the rest of your work is. And I have a couple of optional templates here that you can use, either a document or a slide set to organize your work, just to help you make sure that you don't forget to write out the question or to write out the full answer. This isn't just a place for A, B, C, D. I want to have an actual written out or drawn out answer there. And then justifying it. So many people forget to justify their answers, and you get no credit if you don't. So using one of these templates should hopefully help you remember. And you can add as much stuff as you need to these. You have an entire slide to an answer, and here in the doc you can add as many pages and pages of writing and text and everything into this box. And the great thing is, all of this stuff is all going to stay linked to that same question there. And if you didn't need to correct this question, then you can delete it, either just by clearing it out so it's not there. You can obviously tell that you didn't even try and correct this, and hopefully you didn't need to. Or you can just entirely delete those rows, either by right-clicking or long pressing, depending on your device, to get rid of it so it doesn't take up any space there on your page. And I just need to see the questions that you missed points on with those questions, answers, and justifications. So feel free to delete as much as you want. Make these documents work for you, and just make sure to cover what you need to get those points back. So look over your test, and don't just look for things being marked as incorrect, because you might have actually gotten some points there. If you just misspelled elements, you might see that you got like 2 out of 2 or 3 out of 3, 4 out of 4 on a question, even if Canvas tried to not give you credit for it. Or on questions with multiple parts, you'll see that sometimes you missed part of it and you got partial credit, but that is still missed points there, and so anything that you missed needs to be included in your corrections, and I'll be expecting to see it. I'll be checking the test next to your corrections to make sure everything gets covered, so don't forget about anything. It's probably a good place to start, is going through and setting up your document with exactly which questions you lost points on, to make sure that you cover everything, and then it's just about filling in those blanks. Now, you do need to write out the question itself in those spaces. We're doing this all virtually, so you should be able to copy and paste, right? I just need to know what question you're answering, because a lot of these questions had multiple different versions, so I just need to know what the question was so that I know you got the right answer. And to that effect, every single quiz had those answers in different orders, so I don't want to just see A, B, C, D. Tell me the actual written out word answer there, and then justify it. I don't want you to just say that, like, this molecule was polar because it was polar. Like, it was the only polar option. Yes, I understand that. That's probably why you chose it as the answer. Tell me why, how you know that that was polar. And a lot of these are going to come back to you analyzing structures. If you remember, that was a lot of our unit. So you're going to have to draw the structure in order to analyze it and in order to back up some of those questions. So the good news is a lot of these are repetitive. Some of these you might have drawn in your packet before. So they shouldn't be kind of too hard to draw out. And then if you do have to use it multiple times, then you can just copy and paste that same image that you drew once and uploaded an image of once. You can copy and paste it into every question that you need it for. Or in the second and third and fourth times that you need to reference it, you can say, oh, this is polar as drawn in question 35. Like, you can see that it has this on it. That makes it polar. So you don't have to paste it in there a billion times if they're huge and they are inconvenient there. But make sure that you include that structure on any question that's asking about the structure. And then I'll talk about some of these other things as we look at the test itself. So it seems like we're about ready to do that. So let's talk about the different ways that you can get to that. Of course, that you can get to it from our homepage. If you go into our quizzes or our Module 5, you're going to find it in there. It's our Unit 4 and 5 assessment. If you ever need to get back to it, I also have it in that announcement. I mentioned and linked directly to the test and to the correction steps. So if you're ever struggling to find either of them, then coming over to the announcements is a great, easy place to find it, because even when I make additional announcements, it's right there and you can always scroll down and find what you need. But it's actually important for later on. I'm going to mention that we need to look at a rubric to see the points that you earned for question 38, and you actually can't get to that if you come in to the assignment straight from the quizzes tab or from our module, and it opens up as an assignment here. It'll show you the assignment. It'll show you which questions you missed and all the points that you missed there, but it doesn't actually show the rubric anywhere. So to see the rubric from our homepage, we actually have to go into this assignment from the grades tab. And then, oh, look at this test student. So many missing assignments and so many horrible grades. And right here, we can see this assignment, and you can see the rubric already just by clicking on the clipboard. So you don't have to go any farther. If that's all you're looking for, you can come and, like, you're just ready to work on question 38. Come and look here, write down what points you missed where and which structures you need to do what on. You can also find that rubric if you open up the assignment from the grades tab. It looks a little bit different than it does from the other tab. I actually already have these up. You can see that difference here, very slightly different. But when you open this assignment up from the grades tab, you can already see or still see those questions and the points you missed and everything. It has this comment box to the side, and right above that, right underneath our grade in this corner, it says show rubric. So this wouldn't be a bad place to work on your test corrections, because you can do everything you need to do here with the test itself, and then when you get to the point where you need it, you can open up that rubric. So the only reason I don't really like that is that it's a little bit smaller than the questions. It doesn't kind of let things take up the whole page here. So I actually don't use that too much. So let's actually look at the test. After you've started your document, you're scrolling through, you can skip over questions that you got full points on that aren't marked as incorrect, don't need to be included, or maybe you delete them from that document like we said. And then if we did miss it with multiple choice questions, most of these are pretty straightforward. Find the right answer and explain why. This one is in Unit 4 specifically. And this one, if you didn't realize it, oxygen is our answer that has a double bond. But this is one of those questions where it's kind of hard to explain without the structure. You gotta have the structure. Draw it out, show that process, count the electrons and everything. Show me that formation of that double bond. And that's proof enough that it has it. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit there. Here, I would want to see this structure redrawn and kind of use it to explain your answers. Notice here I got 2 out of 4 points. So there are 4 different answers to this question, even though for some reason only 2 of them show up as drop-down menus here. Maybe it's just because they were short, or maybe it's because they were numbers, or for whatever reason, these answers were embedded kind of in there. That doesn't mean that they were right or wrong. It's just showing you those answers kind of where they were. But this is the answers you chose, and that's kind of where they fit in the question, just kind of so you can see that. And so we just need to figure out which 2 of these answers are incorrect and correct them and explain why kind of those are correct. So we could just be like, oh, this is how many non-bonded electrons it has, because look, these are the non-bonded electrons, and draw arrows to it or whatnot and use that diagram as an example. Here, notice an example where I got 2 out of 3 points, so there's only one question here, one kind of thing that I got wrong and need to explain why. Here, this one was kind of an imaginary molecule. It wasn't actually talking about something specific like CO2 or CH4 or something. But kind of like with that imaginary molecule I drew here and in our bell ringers, use kind of just imaginary letters to draw out this shape, and that can maybe be part of your background or part of your kind of explanation and justification for the shape that we're coming up with here. Some more Unit 4, kind of a little bit of Unit 5 stuff in there. Pretty simple questions that you should be able to find in your packet or your podcasts. Some people had a question about this one. There's kind of some extra information here. We're looking for a polar molecule. Which one of these is polar? Technically, they all have polar bonds because bonds are polar when they're connecting different elements. And all of these have a mixture of different elements. So the bonds are polar, but like the polarity podcast says, sometimes those polar bonds cancel each other out and make the whole molecule nonpolar. So just focus on the skills that you've got, the structures that we need to draw here to figure out which one of these is polar, because it's a lot simpler than drawing those bond diagrams. Question 10 was a multi-select question. So here I actually got 2 correct answers in there and then 1 incorrect answer, which meant that I got 2 points for the 2 correct answers, but then I missed 1 for an incorrect, which left me with 1 out of 2 points. If for whatever reason you selected all 4 of them, then you would have gotten 2 points and then minus 2 points, so that would have been 0. So there are 2 answers here to this specific question, so make sure that you find them and explain why those are present in HBR or why the other ones that you chose not to include aren't present in HBR. But this does have 2 answers to help you out there a little bit. These are pretty easy things here. Here, make sure you tell me what that intermolecular force is that it has, that is the strongest force. And then we get to questions 16 through 19, and this is where in our test corrections instructions it tells us to not just explain why we think it's correct, but to make sure to identify if that substance is ionic or covalent in our explanation, because that is our first step in any of our names and formulas, because we do completely different things for ionic and covalent compounds. So make sure you mention what type of compound it is in your explanation. And unfortunately, as you're looking through these, a lot of your answers are going to look great, like copper fluoride is beautiful and amazing, but it doesn't have the Roman numeral in it that it needs. And even one little mistake like that got no credit. This is one of our older topics, and we're holding you to a little bit higher standard than we were before, but it isn't worth that many points, not compared to a lot of the structures and the other stuff we're doing. But if you were missing a lot of things consistently on all of them, then you could have, it definitely adds up a bit. So look over them, and like I mentioned in here, it could just be something little. It wasn't in there, it was just here. I have a lot of examples of where maybe I had an extra Roman numeral where I didn't need it, or I forgot my prefixes entirely because I forgot that this was a covalent compound that needs prefixes. So lots of little things, and including one of the most heartbreaking of all is if you forgot the "ide" at the end of a name. Like this should be calcium phosphide. I couldn't give it to you because as little as that is, that's a little detail that is in every single compound. We do that for every single compound name unless it has one of those special names from the back of the periodic table. So if you're missing that, you're missing something pretty important, even if it is seemingly a small detail. Like we've seen in this most recent unit, if I do something like switch up my prefixes and my subscripts, then I'm going to get my molar mass wrong. I'm going to get the entire dimensional analysis wrong. So these are super important things that are becoming more crucial, not less. So put the effort in. Kind of right smack dab in the middle of all of these names and formulas that we're talking about and looking at right now is our first structure right here after question 22. Our first question that asked us to draw an ionic compound structure, and we'll come back to this when we're talking about question number 38 at the end probably. The only reason you'd need this is if you had completely not realized that there was a question here that asked us to draw a structure between these two elements, or you might have had a different couple of elements on yours. So come back and look at this. This is one of the things that should have been on your upload sheet, although for some reason a lot of people didn't include it. Just in case it's because you have no idea how to do them, I did actually include a direct link to your Ionic Lewis dot podcast here so that you can watch exactly how you're supposed to work out questions like this. So, then in our formulas, more heartbreaking stuff for me to see. I wrote a lot of formulas on this test. I can't really ask you to do chemistry without putting some chemistry on the page, and none of these formulas that I wrote out, either in this name and formula section or in any of these multiple choice questions, none of those ever had any Roman numerals in them. None of them have any charges in them. This one does, I guess at the end it's kind of incomplete, though, and it's kind of a distracting answer, so it's not supposed to. It's supposed to look wrong and bad, and yet I still saw lots of these answers here that had those charges or had Roman numerals in the formula. We never do that. They might be in the name, but not in a formula. So use your test. Look at the other stuff. Check your work with what you got. You got your lots of packet work, yes, but that might or might not be right. But the test stuff, I'm not going to be making mistakes on this kind of test. And if I do, I'll tell you about it. Especially like question 29. If you missed question 29, or even if you didn't, you should go back and look at question number 21 and think about the implications of that, because we did it on purpose. Then here's our second structure drawing question here. These were covalent, so these should look completely different than the ionic one. And we tried our best to put them separately on the test. We could have put them together, but we were worried that you guys would confuse them for each other. The ionic compound was the one where we were supposed to be drawing our elements separately with some dots and stuff, and then drawing arrows, and then had all of these details. And then in our covalent structures, this is where we drew lines and connected things together. So arrows in ionic, lines in covalent. That's because of the difference in their electrons, and people were still mixing it up even though we tried to get them separate. So here with these structures, this is where that's where it told you to do them, but of course you drew them and then uploaded them in question 38. So this will show you how many points you got there, and this is where you'd need to come back and look at the rubric. Technically, the test student should have some more points there, because the total number of points from your rubric here should match the number of points that you have here in this question, because that's how we graded them and added them up, was using this rubric. So once you get to those structures, anything that you miss points from in here, even if it's just 1 point, you've got to correct it because you did something wrong. You might have had extra electrons in there. Most people miss more than just one thing. If they made a mistake, it kind of ended up being more than one thing. But if you're curious where those points, what those factors were, most of them are basically the same for those covalent structures. Is getting the right number and type of elements, getting the right number of electrons, and then putting the electrons in the right kind of type number and position of bonds and lone pairs. So the NO2 just had one more thing, and a lot of people forgot about it. It was those square brackets and the -1 charge. So if you missed just 1 point on that NO2 and you didn't have the square brackets and the charge, that's probably all you forgot. So just redraw that. It's probably perfect and beautiful as it is, and get you that point. But a lot of people had some other mistakes there. So look at them. Start by counting those electrons from the periodic table. So that's basically it on the test. Like I mentioned before, in any of these questions where we're analyzing structures, I'm going to need to see the structure. Even if you drew it correctly in question 38 and you don't need to redraw it there, if you missed analyzing any part of it here, then you're going to have to show me that structure correctly redrawn. And hopefully you have an image of you drawing it correctly then, that you can include, and then you're just going to have to fix your analysis of it. So I think that's basically everything that I had written out, but I know that sometimes when you write it out, things kind of get a little bit confused. So hopefully this helped, and you got to see some right answers, and you got to see some wrong answers that are maybe different than your wrong answers, so it might help you with the process of finding the correct answers there. So let me know if you have any questions or have any issues. Send me an email or come to tutorials when we get back. But make sure you're being proactive about this one way or another. And have a great rest of your break.